So my question is in regards to mainline Protestantism here in the States, since the 4 factors you have laid out, arguably, the Episcopal Church, for instance, has met a number of those factors, and increasingly so as it's declined. So how do you account for that?
I got a very simple answer for this. Okay. Demography. There's a widely shared misunderstanding, which is systematically propagated by certain religious movements within the United States, evangelicals, that the growth of evangelicalism has to do with relative to mainline Protestantism has to do with the success of their outreach or the character of their theology. Basically, it's all about average levels of female fertility. Evangelical group have, evangelical women, for example, on average have 3.4, 3.5 children during their lifetimes, whereas mainline Protestants, are well below replacement levels, 1.4, and more liberal Protestant congregations. Now, obviously, to the degree to which religious reproduction is partly about biological reproduction, it is about that to a large degree. People switch, but not as much as you might think over their lifetimes. They typically switch within denominational families. The decline of mainline Protestantism is almost all about declining levels of female fertility. Now, that points you to what the real theological question is, which is, why do evangelicals have more kids? And I don't have a great answer to that question. But if you come up with one, I guarantee you'll get a lot of attention.
How about Episcopalians having this gaping hole? I'm one, but we've got a gaping hole between 12 and 35. In our congregations. So it's not just the low rates of fertility, it's a low rates of attraction of those who you give birth to, right? So which is a sense of kind of issue of internal transmission and ability to internally transmit also faith. Do you think that plays a role?
I haven't really looked at the numbers really closely recently. Okay. I mean, one thing I can say is that what you're describing is a fairly typical phenomenon. That in mid to late adolescence, people leave when they get married, and then when they have kids, they tend to return. So I mean, that's a very common a very common thing. What might be true is that that the kind of stricter churches, evangelical or Pentecostal churches, stricter churches, which really have much stronger and for theological reasons apply much stronger forms of collective pressure on individuals to remain within the fold, may actually do a better job. That's why I say I don't know the numbers, whether they do a better job of actually keeping people active between, the ages of, whatever, 15 or 18 and 35 or 40. It may well be that they do, but whether that matters or not a lot in the long run, again, that's another question. Maybe it does. Maybe it does in the sense that it could be that's part of the answer to the fertility problem. That's precisely the period of late adolescence and young adulthood when people develop certain kinds of long-standing attitudes towards sexuality, marriage, reproduction, and so on. But that's just a thought. I don't know if it's true.
Can I push back just a little bit on the idea of fertility answering it all? Because it's my understanding that the kind of cradle Protestantism is fading also, that's sort of a corresponding trend that, so it seems to me like there has to be something else accounting for it, given that they are meeting a number of these factors, or is it anticipating something that might then now affect some of these flourishing, growing religions that they haven't yet faced? I mean, what's the X factor?
It's conceivable, but again, I think that there have been several studies of this. One in particular, quite recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, that really find that almost just an extraordinary amount of the sort of variation is just explained by pure demography. I mean, I can give you the site afterward. Now, whether or not that's changing. I mean, you'd have to really sort of go and look at the data to figure out whether that's the case. It's not implausible to me what you're saying. It's just, the question is whether it's true.